The story of the Americas is, honestly, a vast and epic saga. It's a tale written across two immense continents, stretching all the way from the frozen Arctic to the windswept tip of the South. This isn't just a history of nations or of kings, it's really about the land itself and the people who first called it home. Our journey begins long ago, in a world sculpted by ice and shaped by immense natural forces. It was a time when humanity was still young, venturing out across the globe, driven by a deep and enduring instinct to explore what lay beyond the horizon. For thousands of years, these two great landmasses remained untouched by human hands, a pristine wilderness just waiting for its first human chapter to be written. The curtain rises on this grand stage during the last great ice age. Much of the world's water was locked away in these colossal glaciers, causing sea levels to fall dramatically. This incredible drop in the ocean revealed a bridge of land, a corridor connecting the continents of Asia and North America. This was the Bering Land Bridge, or Beringia. It was a vast, cold and windswept plain, not a narrow path but a sprawling territory teeming with life. Woolly mammoths, steppe bison, ancient horses. And following these great herds were small, resilient bands of human hunters, the true pioneers of the Americas, unknowingly stepping into a world entirely new to humankind. Their journey wasn't a single, grand expedition. It was more like a slow, generational trickle of people moving into new territories. These weren't conquerors with maps and ambitions of empire. They were families just seeking survival. They moved with the seasons, following the animals that provided their food, their clothing, their tools. Each step eastward was really a step into the unknown. They faced formidable challenges, the biting cold, the immense glaciers that blocked their path south. Yet their persistence was extraordinary. Over centuries they adapted, innovated, and pushed forward, their footprints marking the very first human presence in a hemisphere that had been empty of people for all of its existence. These first peoples were the ancestors of all the indigenous populations that would later flourish across North and South America. The story of their arrival, dated to at least 14,500 years before present, is a testament to human endurance and adaptability. They carried with them the skills and knowledge of their Asian homelands, but they would be profoundly changed by the new world they discovered. The sheer scale and diversity of the Americas would shape their cultures, their beliefs, their destinies in ways they could never have imagined. This was the true beginning, the moment when the human story of the Americas was finally set in motion. Imagine, just for a moment, stepping into a world of breathtaking diversity. The Americas offered a landscape of unparalleled variety, a tapestry of ecosystems woven across two continents. In the north, vast forests stretched for thousands of miles, punctuated by towering mountain ranges and sprawling grassy plains. Great rivers carved their way through the land, the Mississippi, the Amazon, creating fertile valleys and dense jungles. As these early peoples moved southward, they encountered scorching deserts, high-altitude plateaus, and lush, tropical rainforests alive with life. Every new environment presented unique challenges and opportunities, requiring new ways of living and thinking. This geographical richness gave rise to an astonishing diversity of cultures. There was no single, uniform American experience. Instead, thousands of distinct societies emerged, each intricately adapted to its specific corner of the world. Along the Pacific Northwest coast, people harvested the bounty of the sea, building cultures around salmon and cedar. On the Great Plains, nomadic groups centered life around immense herds of bison. In the dense jungles of Central and South America, communities learned to thrive, mastering the rainforest's countless species. The journey from north to south was a remarkable feat of exploration. Archaeological evidence reveals a stunningly rapid expansion. First secure dates are in North America, yet within a few thousand years people reached the southern tip of South America. Sites in what is now Chile, dated to around 12,000 BC, show these pioneers traversed the entire length of the Americas. They crossed narrow isthmuses, climbed the formidable Andes, and navigated some of the planet's most difficult terrains. This rapid spread is one of the greatest migration stories in human history, a testament to our species' relentless drive to explore. This expansion was not just physical, it was a journey of discovery and innovation. As people settled, they began a long, intimate process of understanding the land. They learned which plants were edible, which were medicinal, and which were poisonous. They studied local animals, developing sophisticated hunting techniques suited to each. This deep, accumulated knowledge formed the foundation for great civilizations. It was this profound connection to the land, established over millennia, that allowed the next leap, the dawn of agriculture. The story we are about to embark on is, honestly, a chronicle of immense change spanning more than 16,000 years. It's a journey that will take us from the small, mobile bands of Ice Age hunters to the sprawling, complex empires that would later dominate the continents. Our timeline is a guide, an animated timeline showing key dates and civilizations. We will witness the slow and patient development of agriculture, a revolution that would fundamentally transform human society. The domestication of plants like maize, beans, squash. Those crops allowed people to settle in one place, build permanent villages, and support growing populations. This shift set the stage for everything that was to come. Following the agricultural revolution, we will explore the rise of the first great civilizations. In the fertile lands of Mesoamerica, the Olmecs, the Proto-Maya, they built ceremonial centers. They developed complex belief systems. They created stunning works of art. In the Andes, the Chavan culture flourished. Chavan distinctive art. Chavan religious influence across regions. These early societies were trailblazers, laying groundwork for later empires. They invented calendars. They developed early forms of writing. They mastered monumental architecture. Our journey leads into the Classic period, a golden age. Maya intellectual and artistic achievements. Maya writing system, the most advanced in the hemisphere. Cities like Palenque, Teotihuacan, an immense city in central Mexico. Teotihuacan's giant sun pyramid. Teotihuacan's moon pyramid. The Nazca lines etched into the desert floor. The rise of Tiahuanaco in the Andes. An era of innovation, cultural flowering, construction of cities rivaling the world. Finally, a dramatic turning point. The formidable Aztecs in Mexico, the sprawling, highly organized Inca in Peru. Just as these empires reached their zenith, a new force appeared on the horizon. Ships from a distant continent arrived. They carried explorers, they carried soldiers, they carried new ideas from Europe. The meeting of old and new worlds unleashed a chain of events that irrevocably altered the course of history for the Americas and the planet. This is the epic tale of migration, innovation, conflict, transformation, that we will now explore. The saga of human settlement in the Americas begins with a journey of epic proportions, undertaken in a world vastly different from our own. Around 14,500 BC, during the final throes of the last ice age, the planet was far colder. Massive ice sheets, several kilometers thick, covered much of North America. They locked up vast quantities of the world's water and dropped sea levels by over 100 meters. A land bridge was revealed where the Bering Strait now separates Asia from Alaska. This was Beringia, a vast subcontinental plain, a cold, windswept steppe tundra, yet surprisingly rich in life. Great herds of mammoth, bison, and horse roamed its grassy expanses. Small, nomadic hunter-gatherer groups followed these herds. They weren't modern explorers with maps, they were families following the game that fed them. Their eastward movement was gradual, a generational creep across Beringia. They were moving into new hunting grounds, unaware they were stepping onto a new continent. Their resilience was remarkable. They mastered survival in Arctic-like conditions, crafting warm clothing from animal hides, and developing specialized tools for hunting Ice Age mammals. The journey south from Beringia faced immense challenges. For a long time, paths were blocked by two colossal ice sheets, Laurentide, Cordilleran. These glaciers covered most of Canada. As the climate warmed, a narrow ice-free corridor opened between them. Alternatively, some traveled down the Pacific coast, using boats to hop between ice-free pockets and exploit marine resources. Whichever route they took, they emerged into a world teeming with life, a hunter's paradise. Once south of the ice, their expansion across the continents was astonishingly swift. It showcased their adaptability and the richness of new environments. Within a few thousand years, humans had populated the entire hemisphere. Archaeological evidence spans from the plains of North America to the forests of the Amazon. By 12,000 BC, clear signs appear as far south as Monteverde in Chile. This journey across diverse, challenging terrain in a short span stands as one of the greatest migration stories in human history, marking the arrival of our species in the last great habitable landmass on Earth. For thousands of years after their arrival, the first Americans lived as nomadic hunter-gatherers. Their societies were small, mobile, and deeply attuned to the natural world around them. They followed the seasonal migrations of animals and the ripening of wild plants, their lives dictated by the constant search for food. This way of life, while successful, limited the size and complexity of their communities. The Great Transformation, the revolution that would pave the way for villages, cities, and empires, began quietly and slowly, not with a great discovery, but with the careful observation and cultivation of native plants. This was the dawn of agriculture, a pivotal moment that would forever change the human story in the Americas. This agricultural revolution did not happen overnight, nor did it occur in the same way everywhere. It was a gradual process that unfolded independently in several regions between 6500 and 5000 BC. In the highlands of Mexico, people began to experiment with the wild grasses that grew there. One of these, a plant called teosinte, was the wild ancestor of maize or corn. Through centuries of patient selection, saving seeds from the plants with the most desirable traits, they slowly transformed this humble grass into the highly productive staple crop that would fuel civilizations. Alongside maize, they also domesticated beans, squash, chilies, avocados. These crops created a powerful agricultural package that provided a complete and reliable source of nutrition. A similar process unfolded in the Andean highlands of South America. The potato became the cornerstone of Andean agriculture, with hundreds of varieties being developed for different elevations and conditions. Quinoa, a protein-rich grain, was another vital staple. In the warmer, wetter lowlands of South America, other plants were domesticated, including manioc and sweet potatoes. This agricultural innovation allowed people to transition from a nomadic existence to a sedentary one. For the first time, they could stay in one place year-round, confident that their fields would provide for them, leading to the establishment of the first permanent villages. The shift to agriculture had profound consequences for society. With a stable food supply, populations began to grow, villages expanded, and new social structures emerged. No longer did everyone have to be involved in the daily search for food. This allowed for the specialization of labor. Some people could become craftspeople, creating pottery to store surplus grain. Others could become priests, responsible for the rituals to ensure a good harvest. Others could become leaders, to organize the community's labor. This growing social complexity, born from the simple act of planting a seed, laid the essential groundwork for the rise of the first complex civilizations that would soon emerge across the Americas. With the foundations of agriculture firmly established, the stage was set for the next chapter, the rise of the first great civilizations. From around 2000 BC, in the fertile lowlands of Mesoamerica, in the high valleys of the Andes, societies began to grow in scale and complexity. These were the cultural parents of the Americas. They began to build on a monumental scale. They created sophisticated art. They developed complex religious and political systems, marking a profound shift from simple village life to the dawn of civilization. In Mexico, one of the earliest of these formative cultures was the Olmec, who flourished in the tropical lowlands of the Gulf Coast from about 1300 to 400 BC. The Olmec are often called the mother culture of Mesoamerica. They built the first major ceremonial centers with large earthen mounds and plazas. They are most famous for their colossal carved heads, massive stone portraits of their rulers, some weighing over 20 tons. The Olmec also developed early forms of glyph writing and a calendrical system, innovations that would be adopted and refined by later civilizations, the Maya and the Aztecs. Contemporaneously, far to the south in the Andes Mountains of Peru, another influential culture was taking shape. From about 1200 to 400 BC, the Chavín culture emerged, centered on the ceremonial site of Chavín de Huántar. This was not a political empire built on conquest, but a religious and cultural phenomenon whose influence spread across the Andes. Pilgrims traveled from distant regions to its temple complex, which featured intricate stone carvings of powerful hybrid deities: jaguar, eagle, serpent. The distinctive Chavín art style and its religious ideas helped to unify the region culturally. These early civilizations were the trailblazers. In Mesoamerica, other cultures like the Zapotecs began building their hilltop capital of Monte Alban around 400 BC. They continued to build on Olmec foundations. They developed a more advanced writing system and a complex urban society. At the same time, the Proto-Maya cultures were beginning to coalesce, laying the groundwork for the incredible classic Maya civilization to come. The first dated Olmec monument, from 31 BC, provides a tangible link to this era of innovation, showcasing their mastery of the calendar and early writing. These formative cultures were the crucial first step, transforming the Americas from a continent of scattered villages into one of emerging civilizations. Emerging from the foundations laid by the Olmec and other Proto-Maya groups, the Maya civilization rose to become one of the most brilliant and sophisticated cultures of the ancient world. Their story unfolds across the tropical lowlands of what is now southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras. The Classic period from roughly 300 to 900 AD marked the zenith of their achievements. Unlike the centralized empires, the Maya were organized into a network of powerful city-states, Tikal, Calakmul, Copan, Palenque. These urban centers were ruled by divine kings who vied for power, a dynamic political landscape of shifting alliances and frequent warfare. The intellectual achievements of the Maya were extraordinary. They developed the most advanced pre-Columbian writing system. Scribes recorded dynastic histories, religious myths, and astronomical observations on stone monuments, pottery, and codices. One such book, produced around the year 890, stands as the first known book created in the Americas. This mastery allowed them to document their history in unparalleled detail. Maya astronomers and mathematicians were incredibly advanced. They built a complex calendar system, the 260-day sacred calendar, the 365-day solar calendar. Their mathematical system included the revolutionary concept of zero. That allowed precise predictions, tracking the sun, moon, Venus. Those calculations guided religion and statecraft, shaping rituals, coronations, and warfare. Their architectural and artistic legacy is breathtaking. They built monumental stone pyramids that served as temples to the gods and tombs for their kings. Grand palaces, spacious courtyards, and ceremonial ball courts. Palenque, which flourished around 642 AD, is a prime example of their architectural prowess, with its elegant palace and the stunning temple of the inscriptions. Maya art, intricate stone stelae, painted ceramics, and delicate jade carvings. These works showcase naturalism and narrative complexity, capturing the vibrant life of their civilization in stunning detail. While the Maya city-states flourished in the south, another, even larger power dominated the central highlands of Mexico. This was the colossal city of Teotihuacan. Flourishing between 200 and 900 AD, it was one of the largest and most influential cities in the world. Its population may have exceeded 150,000 people. Unlike the Maya cities, Teotihuacan was a single massive urban center, meticulously planned on a grid that radiated from the Avenue of the Dead. Its scale was immense, and its origins remain one of the great mysteries of the ancient Americas. The city's skyline was dominated by monumental architecture. The most imposing is the Pyramid of the Sun. Built around 100 AD, standing over 65 meters tall, its base nearly equal in size to that of the Great Pyramid of Giza. Across the Avenue of the Dead rises the Pyramid of the Moon. At the heart lies the Citadel, a vast sunken plaza, containing the ornate temple of the Feathered Serpent, later known to the Aztecs as Quetzalcoatl. The city featured sprawling, multi-family apartment compounds. Teotihuacan's influence spread across Mesoamerica. Distinctive artistic styles, religious iconography, fine obsidian tools, pottery. Evidence appears in Maya cities like Tikal, suggesting trade, suggesting diplomacy, and perhaps military intervention. For centuries it was a dominant cultural power, an economic powerhouse, and perhaps a military one. A cosmopolitan metropolis that set a standard for urban life. The decline is as mysterious as the rise. Around the mid-6th century, the ceremonial core was burned and looted. Internal uprising, civil war, invasion. The city was never completely abandoned, but its power was broken and its population dwindled. Its legacy endured for 1,000 years. Later cultures like the Aztecs discovered the ruins and regarded them with awe. They named it the City of the Gods. Its architecture and mythology became foundational to central Mexico. At the same time that Teotihuacan and the Maya were shaping the destiny of Mesoamerica, powerful and enigmatic cultures were also rising in the challenging landscapes of South America. In the high-altitude plains surrounding Lake Titicaca, on the border of modern-day Bolivia and Peru, the Tiahuanaco Empire emerged, flourishing from approximately 400 to 1000 AD, centered on a monumental stone city, also called Tiahuanaco. This society mastered the art of high-altitude agriculture. They developed an ingenious system of raised fields, irrigation channels created a protective microclimate, which helped them support a large and dense population. The city of Tiahuanaco itself was a remarkable feat of engineering and artistry. massive stone blocks weighing up to 100 tons, fitted together with astounding precision. Its ceremonial heart included the Akapana Pyramid and the Kalasasaya Temple. The most iconic monument is the Gateway of the Sun, carved with an image of a central deity, often called the Staff God, who appears to be a precursor to the Inca creator god, Viracocha. Tiahuanaco was not just a city, but the center of a vast state with colonies, trade routes, and religious prestige. Meanwhile, along the arid southern coast of Peru, the Nazca left behind one of the most baffling and fascinating legacies of the ancient world. Flourishing from roughly 400 BC to 1000 AD, the Nazca were masters of desert survival, building underground aqueducts called puquios. They made beautiful multicolored pottery, depicting shamans, mythical beasts, and agricultural motifs. Their art shows a deep spiritual and natural connection. The Nazca are most famous for the Nazca lines, enormous geoglyphs etched into the desert floor between 100 BC and 900 AD. Geometric shapes, spirals, hummingbirds, spiders, monkeys, and fish. Many figures are hundreds of meters long and only fully visible from the air. Their exact purpose remains a subject of intense debate among scholars. Theories include astronomical calendars, pathways for religious processions, or appeals to mountain or sky deities for water and fertility. Whatever their meaning, the lines are a powerful symbol of the Nazca worldview and their effort to transform the landscape. In the wake of the decline of the great classic period civilizations like Teotihuacan and many Maya city-states, a new era, the post-classic period, dawned in Mesoamerica around 900 AD. This was a time of significant change, migration, and the rise of new powers who built upon the legacies of their predecessors. In central Mexico, the vacuum left by Teotihuacan was eventually filled by the Toltecs, who established their capital at Tula between 800 and 1200 AD. The Toltecs were remembered by later cultures, especially the Aztecs, as legendary warriors, master artisans, and the bearers of a golden age of civilization. Their influence was felt across Mesoamerica, blending military might with cultural prestige. The city of Tula is most famous for its striking Pyramid B, topped by 4 colossal statues of Toltec warriors. Iconic Atlantean warrior statues atop Pyramid B. These imposing 5-meter-tall figures carved from basalt, once supported the roof of a temple, are armed with spear throwers and ceremonial knives, symbolizing the militaristic character of Toltec society. The imagery at Tula, eagles devouring human hearts, jaguars devouring human hearts, and processions of armed warriors, points to a state religion that emphasized sacrifice and military prowess. The influence of the Toltecs spread far, their patron deity Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, appearing in art and architecture of distant cities, most notably at Chichen Itza in the Maya lands. While new powers like the Toltecs rose and fell, some civilizations demonstrated incredible longevity. In the Oaxaca Valley of southern Mexico, the Zapotec people sustained a continuous cultural tradition for over 2 millennia, from 400 BC to 1500 AD. Their magnificent early capital, Monte Alban, was a major power during the Classic period, a sprawling city built atop a flattened mountain with commanding views of the surrounding valleys. The Zapotecs were brilliant architects and developed one of the earliest writing systems in Mesoamerica. They maintained their independence and cultural identity for centuries, engaging in trade, warfare, and diplomacy with their powerful neighbors, including Teotihuacan. Even after the abandonment of Monte Alban as their primary political center around 900 AD, Zapotec culture continued to thrive. They established new centers like Mitla, which became their most important religious and ceremonial site during the post-classic period. Mitla is renowned for its unique and elegant architecture and its intricate geometric mosaics made from thousands of small, cut stones fitted together without mortar. This long endurance of the Zapotec civilization, from the time of the Olmecs to the arrival of the Spanish, showcases the deep roots and remarkable resilience of the indigenous cultures that populated the Americas, each contributing its own unique thread to the rich and complex tapestry of the continent's history. Long before the great voyages of the Spanish and the great voyages of the Portuguese, another group of European seafarers had already brushed against the shores of the Americas. Around the year 985, Norse explorers led by Eric the Red established settlements in Greenland. Rugged, resilient communities pushed westward across the frigid North Atlantic. From these Greenlandic outposts their voyages continued. Driven by a thirst for resources like timber and a spirit of exploration, they sailed further west. They made landfall on the coast of what is now Newfoundland, Vinland. These Norse explorers, often called Vikings, established a small settlement at L'Anse aux Meadows around the year 1000. This was the first, albeit brief, European presence in the New World. A fleeting encounter, two worlds meeting after millennia of isolation. They encountered the indigenous inhabitants, whom they called Skraelings. Interactions included tentative trade and violent conflict. The settlement was small and vulnerable, thousands of kilometers from Greenland. Faced with a hostile environment and resistance from a larger native population, the Norse experiment was short-lived. The settlement was abandoned after a few decades. Vinland faded into myth and saga in Europe. It had no lasting impact on the peoples of the Americas, nor did it spark further European interest. For nearly 500 years, the hemispheres remained separate, on parallel tracks. In the Americas, the post-classic period saw the rise of the Aztec. In the Americas, the post-classic period saw the rise of the Inca. In Europe, the Middle Ages gave way to the Renaissance. Renewed intellectual curiosity, technological advancement, and growing ambition among competing monarchies. The stage for the next, more permanent arrival was the sun-drenched Iberian Peninsula. The year 1492 was pivotal for Spain. Ferdinand II and Isabella I had completed the Reconquista and expelled the last Muslim rulers from Granada. With their nation consolidated and fervent, they looked outward. Advances in shipbuilding like the caravel, navigation instruments and techniques, spurred on by Prince Henry the Navigator of Portugal, had made long-distance ocean voyages far more feasible. Europe was poised to expand, seeking new trade routes to Asia. It was into this ambitious European atmosphere that an Italian mariner named Christopher Columbus stepped forward with a radical idea. He proposed he could reach the lucrative spice markets of the East Indies by sailing west, a direct route across the Atlantic. After rejection by other European courts, he found a receptive audience in Ferdinand and Isabella of Spain, eager to compete with Portuguese rivals. October 12, 1492, after a perilous 10-week voyage, Columbus and his crew made landfall, not in Asia, but on a small island in the Bahamas. The moment of contact would trigger a chain reaction, shattering the isolation of the Americas. Columbus's arrival unleashed a wave of European exploration. He would make 3 more voyages, still believing he'd found Asia's outskirts. Soon, other explorers realized this was an entirely new landmass. In 1507, Martin Waldseemüller published a map naming the new continent America for Amerigo Vespucci, one of the first to argue this was a new world. Spanish and Portuguese crowns moved quickly to claim these lands. In 1494, with the Pope's blessing, they signed the Treaty of Tordesillas, drawing a longitudinal line down the Atlantic to divide the non-Christian world. Spain was granted the lands to the west. Portugal was granted the lands to the east. This included the coast of Brazil, claimed by Pedro Alvarez Cabral in 1500. The quest for riches and a westward passage to Asia fueled further expeditions. In 1513, Vasco Núñez de Balboa crossed the Isthmus of Panama and gazed upon the vast Pacific, the South Sea, confirming a great ocean lay between the Americas and Asia. That same year, Ponce de Leon explored Florida, searching for rumored wealth and the mythical Fountain of Youth. Ferdinand Magellan set out in 1519 to circumnavigate the globe. Magellan was killed in the Philippines, but his surviving crew completed the voyage, proving the true scale of the Earth and the Americas' place upon it. These explorations were driven by greed, religious zeal, and the pursuit of glory. This mindset was embodied by the Spanish conquistadors. They were hardened soldiers, many veterans of the Reconquista, seeking personal fortune, the expansion of the Spanish Empire, and the spread of the Catholic faith. Rumors of vast inland empires glittering with gold and silver circulated. Those tales, filtered from coastal encounters, would send small, determined bands of armed Europeans into the heartlands to conquer great civilizations, setting the stage for a dramatic and violent collision of worlds. The first major clash between European conquistadors and a great American empire occurred in Mexico. In 1519, a determined and ruthless conquistador named Hernán Cortés landed on the coast with a small force of around 500 soldiers, 13 horses, and a few cannons. He soon learned of the mighty Aztec Empire, which dominated central Mexico from its magnificent island capital, Tenochtitlan. The Aztecs, led by their emperor Moctezuma II, ruled over a vast collection of tributary states. Cortés masterfully exploited the resentment many of these subjugated peoples felt, forging crucial alliances that swelled his ranks with thousands of indigenous warriors. Cortés marched inland, audacity, diplomacy, and brutality marking his advance. He was initially welcomed into Tenochtitlan by Moctezuma, who was perhaps unsure if the Spaniards were men or gods. The fragile peace soon shattered. After taking Moctezuma hostage and a series of violent confrontations, the Spanish were temporarily driven from the city. Undeterred, Cortés regrouped with his native allies and in 1521 laid siege to the great capital. The battle was ferocious and devastating. Compounding the violence was the silent and unintentional weapon the Europeans had brought with them: diseases like smallpox, to which the native population had no immunity. The resulting epidemic ravaged the city's defenders, and after a brutal struggle, Tenochtitlan fell. A similar tragedy unfolded a decade later in South America. The vast and sophisticated Inca Empire, which stretched for thousands of kilometers along the Andes, had just emerged from a ruinous civil war. Two brothers, Atahualpa and Huáscar, had fought for the imperial throne, a conflict that had severely weakened the empire's unity and military strength. In 1532, as the victorious Atahualpa was consolidating his rule, a small Spanish expedition led by Francisco Pizarro arrived on the coast. With fewer than 200 men, Pizarro marched into the heart of the empire, using the same playbook of daring and deception that had proven so successful for Cortés. Pizarro arranged a meeting with the unsuspecting Inca emperor at the town of Cajamarca. In a stunning and brutal ambush, the Spanish, with their steel swords, armor, and cavalry, slaughtered thousands of Atahualpa's lightly armed retainers and captured the emperor himself. Though Atahualpa offered a spectacular ransom, a room filled once with gold and twice with silver, Pizarro had him executed after the treasure was collected. The capture and death of their divine king threw the highly centralized Inca state into chaos. Although pockets of Inca resistance would continue for decades, the heart of the empire was broken. In a remarkably short period, two of the most powerful empires in the Americas had been toppled by tiny bands of determined and ruthless conquistadors, aided by strategic alliances, superior weaponry, and the devastating impact of Old World diseases. With the great Aztec and Inca empires shattered, Spain and Portugal arrived to govern vast new territories. This was the dawn of the colonial era, a period of profound and often brutal transformation that would last about 300 years. The Spanish crown moved to impose authority over land seized by the conquistadors, establishing a formal system of governance to manage its sprawling American empire. The primary administrative body was the Council of the Indies, established in 1524. It oversaw making laws, appointing officials, supervising the church, and managing the treasury. The empire was divided into vast administrative districts called viceroyalties: Viceroyalty of New Spain, Mexico City, built on the ruins of Tenochtitlan; Viceroyalty of Peru, Lima. Each was governed by a viceroy, the king's powerful representative. Beneath the viceroys, governors, judges, and local officials administering law and collecting taxes. The system maintained strict control and channeled wealth back to Europe under the Habsburgs. This colonial order created a rigid race and birthplace-based society. At the very top, peninsulares. Below them, Creoles. Then, mestizos, mulattoes, indigenous peoples, and at the very bottom, enslaved Africans. This hierarchy was a deliberate tool to divide and control. Indigenous peoples, the majority, were pushed to the bottom. Legally subjects of the crown but often subjected to forced labor and heavy tribute. The crown passed laws like the New Laws of 1542, championed by friars like Bartolomé de las Casas. But enforcement was often weak and inconsistent. The colonial world was a place of deep inequality, a place where one's destiny was largely determined by the circumstances of one's birth. The primary engine driving the Spanish colonial enterprise was the relentless pursuit of wealth, particularly precious metals. The rumors of gold that had lured Cortés and Pizarro proved to be, well, astonishingly true. The discovery of massive silver deposits, most famously at Potosi in modern-day Bolivia, and Zacatecas in Mexico. These discoveries unleashed a mining boom of unprecedented scale. These mines became the economic heart of the empire, generating fabulous wealth for the Spanish crown. Potosi, a barren mountain that became one of the world's largest cities, was so rich it became synonymous with unimaginable fortune. This silver funded Spain's armies, it financed its European wars, and it fueled a global trade network. To extract this immense wealth, the Spanish implemented systems of forced labor. The most significant was the mita. It was an adaptation of an Inca system of rotational labor drafts. Under Spanish rule, it became a brutal and deadly institution. Indigenous communities were compelled to send a quota of their men to work in the silver mines and on public projects. The work was perilous. The days were long. Exposure to mercury, used in refining, led to widespread illness and death. This exploitative system, along with the devastating impact of Old World diseases, caused a catastrophic decline in the indigenous population throughout the Americas. Beyond mining, the colonial economy was based on large agricultural estates known as haciendas. These vast plantations produced foodstuffs for the mining centers and cities: sugar, cacao, tobacco. Labor on these estates was often provided through the encomienda system. Spanish settlers were granted the right to demand tribute and labor from a specific group of indigenous people. In the tropical lowlands of the Caribbean and Brazil, where indigenous populations were decimated, the Portuguese and Spanish turned to another source of labor: the transatlantic slave trade. Millions of Africans were forcibly transported to the Americas to toil on sugar plantations under brutal conditions. All of this economic activity was tightly controlled by the Spanish crown through a mercantilist system. Trade was restricted. The colonies were legally permitted to trade only with Spain through a few designated ports. A fleet system was established, where convoys of treasure ships protected by warships sailed annually between Spain and the Americas to transport silver and other goods. This system was designed to maximize profits for the mother country and prevent colonial wealth from falling into the hands of Spain's European rivals. The silver of the Americas did not just enrich Spain, it transformed the global economy, financing trade and conflict from Europe to China, truly connecting the world for the first time. The 3 centuries of colonial rule were not a period of passive submission. From the very beginning, Spanish and Portuguese authority was met with resistance, a constant struggle by indigenous peoples and by enslaved Africans to defend their lands, their cultures, and their freedom. Resistance took many forms: open, violent rebellion, and more subtle, everyday acts of defiance. Indigenous communities retreated to remote regions, creating independent enclaves to preserve their way of life. Others used Spanish courts, fighting long legal battles to protect communal lands. One dramatic uprising, the Pueblo Revolt of 1680. In what is now New Mexico, the Pueblo peoples had endured nearly a century of Spanish oppression. Forced labor and aggressive religious conversion, they united under Pope. In a carefully coordinated attack, they drove Spanish settlers, soldiers, and missionaries completely out. They destroyed churches, restored traditional ceremonies, and re-established independence for 12 years. The Spanish returned in 1692 and reconquered the territory, but were forced to adopt more tolerant policies. Other revolts erupted across the empire, driven by taxes, land seizures, and labor demands. In the late 18th century, Bourbon reforms tightened control and raised revenues. Tensions boiled over. The 1781 Comunero Revolt in Colombia saw a multi-ethnic coalition march on the capital to protest new taxes. In the Andes, the largest indigenous rebellion in the Americas broke out in 1780, led by a man claiming descent from the last Inca emperor, who took the name Tupac Amaru II. His rebellion spread across Peru and Bolivia, mobilizing tens of thousands. These revolts were ultimately and brutally crushed, but revealed deep cracks in colonial rule. Enslaved Africans resisted, work slowdowns, sabotage, escaping to form free communities known as Maroons or Quilambos. Sometimes violent slave rebellions erupted. From Tupac Amaru's uprising to the daily struggle of a runaway slave, these acts of defiance showed the desire for freedom and justice could not be extinguished. They were the rumblings of a coming storm that would soon break and sweep away the empires of the New World. By the turn of the 19th century, the mighty Spanish and Portuguese empires in the Americas, which had stood for, 300 years, were showing deep and dangerous cracks. The seeds of their own destruction had been sown long ago within the very structure of colonial society. The Creoles, the American-born elite of pure European descent, had grown increasingly wealthy and educated. They owned vast tracts of land and controlled much of the local economy, yet they were systematically excluded from the highest echelons of political power, which were reserved for officials born in Spain, the Peninsulares. This deep-seated resentment festered for generations, creating a powerful class of individuals who felt their loyalty was to their American homeland, not a distant European crown that treated them as second-class subjects. Adding fuel to this fire were the radical new ideas sweeping across the Atlantic from Europe and North America: liberty, equality, popular sovereignty, and the rights of man. The American Revolution of 1776 had shown that a colony could successfully break away from its European mother country and establish a republic. The French Revolution of 1789 had demonstrated that a long-established monarchy could be overthrown by its own people. These revolutionary ideas circulated secretly among educated Creoles, who read the forbidden works of thinkers like Rousseau and Voltaire, and dreamed of applying these principles to their own societies, imagining a future free from the suffocating grip of Spanish mercantilism and bureaucratic control. The immediate catalyst for revolution, however, came not from within the Americas, but from a crisis in Europe. In 1808, the brilliant and ambitious French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte invaded Spain and Portugal. He forced the Spanish King Charles IV and his heir, Ferdinand VII, to abdicate, and he installed his own brother, Joseph Bonaparte, on the Spanish throne. This act created a massive power vacuum and a crisis of legitimacy that rippled across the Atlantic. For the colonists in Spanish America, the central question became, who is the rightful ruler? Most refused to recognize the French usurper, professing loyalty to the deposed King Ferdinand VII. This loyalty, however, would prove to be a convenient fiction, a temporary mask for their true aspirations. In Portugal, the crisis unfolded differently, but with a similar outcome. To escape Napoleon's invading armies, the entire Portuguese royal court, led by Prince Regent John, fled Lisbon in 1807 and sailed under British protection to Brazil. This unprecedented move transformed the colony into the center of the Portuguese Empire overnight. Rio de Janeiro boomed and King John opened Brazil's ports to trade with friendly nations, effectively ending the old colonial monopoly. While this move delayed the push for independence in Brazil, it gave the colony a taste of autonomy and elevated its status, making it honestly impossible to turn back the clock. Across the Americas, the Napoleonic Wars had shattered the old imperial order, leaving the door wide open for revolution. With the Spanish king imprisoned by Napoleon, a wave of political improvisation swept across the Americas. In cities from Caracas to Santiago to Buenos Aires, Creole leaders took a decisive step, arguing that in the absence of the legitimate king, sovereignty reverted to the people. They formed governing councils or juntas in 1810. While initially claiming to rule in the name of the captive Ferdinand VII, these juntas were, in reality, the first practical expressions of self-government. They expelled royal officials, opened ports to free trade, and began to act as independent states. The mask of loyalty was beginning to slip, revealing the true face of a burgeoning independence movement that was ready to fight for its future. In the Viceroyalty of New Spain, the struggle for independence took on a different, more explosive character. Here, the initial push came not from the Creole elite, but from the lower classes. On September 16, 1810, in the small town of Dolores, a radical Creole priest named Father Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla issued a fiery call to arms. His famous Grito de Dolores, or Cry of Dolores, was not a sophisticated appeal for political rights but a passionate cry for the end of bad government and social oppression. He rallied a massive, unruly army of indigenous and mestizo peasants who marched under the banner of the Virgin of Guadalupe, unleashing a wave of social revolution that terrified the Creole elite as much as it did the Spanish authorities. Hidalgo's rebellion was a chaotic and violent affair. His massive but poorly armed force was eventually defeated, and Hidalgo himself was captured and executed in 1811. However, the torch of revolution in Mexico was immediately picked up by another priest, José María Morelos. A more skilled military and political leader than Hidalgo, Morelos organized a more disciplined army, articulated a clearer vision for an independent Mexico, even formally declaring independence, calling for the abolition of slavery, and calling for the abolition of the caste system. For several years, he controlled a large portion of southern Mexico, but he too was eventually captured and executed by royalist forces in 1815, leaving the Mexican independence movement to fragment into localized guerrilla warfare. Elsewhere in the hemisphere, the path to independence was equally fraught with peril. In Venezuela, a revolutionary junta declared formal independence from Spain as early as 1811, creating the First Republic of Venezuela. However, this bold move was premature. Royalist forces, supported by segments of the population who were wary of the Creole-led revolution, fought back fiercely. A devastating earthquake in 1812, which disproportionately affected rebel-held cities, was seen by many as a sign of divine disapproval. By 1815, the independence movements across Spanish America seemed to be on the verge of collapse. The great leader of the Venezuelan movement, Simon Bolivar, was forced into exile in Jamaica, and with Napoleon defeated in Europe, the restored King Ferdinand VII sent a massive army to brutally reconquer his rebellious American colonies. Just when the cause for independence seemed lost, it was revived by the unyielding determination of two brilliant Creole leaders, Simon Bolivar in the north, and José de San Martin in the south. These two men, though different in temperament, would become the great military heroes of South American independence. From his exile, Simon Bolivar penned his famous letter from Jamaica, outlining his grand vision for a united and independent South America. Returning to the mainland, he established a base in the Orinoco Plains of Venezuela, and with a combination of military genius and sheer audacity, began a campaign that would change the course of the continent's history and earn him the title of the Liberator. Bolivar's most daring feat was his legendary crossing of the Andes in 1819. He led his army of Venezuelan plainsmen and European volunteers on an epic march through flooded lowlands and over the freezing, high-altitude passes of the mountains to surprise the Spanish forces in New Granada, which is modern-day Colombia. The victory was decisive and liberated the region, which Bolivar would eventually unite with Venezuela and Ecuador to form the massive new Republic of Gran Colombia. Over the next few years, Bolivar's forces continued their string of victories, pushing the Spanish out of Venezuela and Ecuador, and marching south towards the last great Spanish stronghold in the mountains of Peru, the heartland of their former empire. Meanwhile, an equally remarkable campaign was being waged from the south. José de San Martin, a quiet and professional soldier who had served in the Spanish army, had returned to his native Argentina to fight for its freedom. After helping secure Argentina's independence, which was formally declared in 1816, he devised a bold plan. Rather than launching a direct bloody assault on the royalist bastion in Peru, he decided to first liberate Chile. In 1817, in a feat of military logistics that rivaled Bolivar's, San Martin led his army of the Andes on a grueling 21-day journey across the towering mountain range, surprising and defeating the Spanish forces and securing Chile's independence in 1818. With Chile secured, San Martin prepared for the final phase of his plan, a seaborne invasion of Peru. By 1821, his forces had captured the capital Lima, and he was declared the protector of Peru. The two great liberators of South America were now converging on the same final prize. In 1822, Bolivar and San Martin held their famous secret meeting in the port city of Guayaquil, Ecuador. What was said between them remains a mystery, but the outcome was clear. The more cautious San Martin, perhaps realizing that the revolution needed a single unified command under the more ambitious Bolivar, chose to step aside. He resigned his command and sailed for a self-imposed exile in Europe, leaving Bolivar to complete the final liberation of South America. With San Martin gone, the final chapter of the military struggle for independence fell to Simon Bolivar and his brilliant young general, Antonio José de Sucre. The last and most formidable Spanish armies were entrenched in the rugged highlands of Peru. In August 1824, Bolivar himself led a cavalry charge to a stunning victory at the Battle of Junin, a high-altitude clash fought entirely with lances and sabers. The final decisive blow came a few months later, on December 9, 1824, at the Battle of Ayacucho. Here, Sucre's Patriot Army decisively defeated the last major Spanish force on the continent, capturing the viceroy and securing the independence of Peru, and by extension, all of Spanish South America. The following year, the region of Upper Peru was renamed Bolivia, in honor of the liberator. In Mexico, independence followed a more convoluted path. After years of guerrilla warfare, the Creole elite, who had once feared the social revolution of Hidalgo and Morelos, finally decided to embrace independence for their own reasons. In 1820, a liberal revolution in Spain threatened their privileged position. Fearing the imposition of a liberal constitution, they switched sides. A royalist officer named Agustín de Iturbide made a pact with the remaining rebels and, in 1821, declared Mexico independent with his Plan of Iguala, which promised unity, religion, and independence. This conservative path to freedom saw Iturbide briefly crown himself Emperor of Mexico, a move that quickly failed, leading to the establishment of a republic. Brazil's journey to nationhood was unique and comparatively bloodless. When King John VI finally returned to Portugal in 1821, he left his son Pedro to rule Brazil as regent. The Portuguese parliament, however, tried to roll back Brazil's autonomy and return it to its former colonial status. The Brazilian elites, who had grown accustomed to their elevated position, rallied around the young prince. In 1822, when ordered to return to Lisbon, Pedro famously refused, declaring, "I shall remain." On September 7, 1822, he issued the Cry of Ipiranga, declaring Brazil's independence from Portugal. By the end of the year, he was crowned Pedro I, the first emperor of a newly independent Brazil, which, unlike its Spanish-speaking neighbors, began its life as a stable constitutional monarchy. By 1826, the struggle was over. From Mexico to Chile, a dozen new nations had been born, forged in over a decade of brutal warfare. The great empires of Spain and Portugal in the Americas were no more. However, Bolivar's grand dream of a united Spanish America quickly shattered. The new nations were burdened by the destruction of war, devastated economies, and deep social and regional divisions. Gran Colombia splintered into Venezuela, Colombia, and Ecuador in 1830. The same year, a disillusioned Bolivar died. The era of independence gave way to a turbulent period of political instability and the rise of military strongmen, or caudillos. The fight for freedom had been won, but the much harder struggle to build stable, prosperous, and just nations had only just begun. The hard-won independence of the American nations was not the glorious dawn many had hoped for. The chains of colonial rule had been broken, but the path forward was fraught with new and formidable challenges. The decade and a half of brutal warfare had left a deep and lasting scar upon the land and its people. Economies were in ruins, mines were flooded, and vast agricultural lands lay abandoned. The dream of a united Spanish America, so passionately championed by Simon Bolivar, crumbled almost as soon as it was conceived. Deep-seated regional loyalties and the ambitions of local leaders proved far stronger than any ideal of continental unity. By 1830, Bolivar's Gran Colombia had fractured into the separate nations of Venezuela, Ecuador, Colombia. In the political vacuum left by the Spanish crown, a new figure rose to dominate the landscape, the caudillo. These were charismatic military strongmen, often heroes of the independence wars, who commanded the loyalty of private armies. They ruled not by law or constitution, but by personal authority and force of will. Men like Juan Manuel de Rosas in Argentina controlled their nations with an iron fist, prioritizing order and their own power over the fragile principles of democracy and liberty. For many decades following independence, the political life of the new republics was defined by a turbulent cycle. Coup, civil wars, dictatorships, rival caudillos battled for control, hindering the development of stable political institutions and a true sense of national identity. The social hierarchies inherited from the colonial era also proved remarkably resilient. While the revolution had removed the peninsulares from power, the Creole elite simply stepped into their place at the top of the social pyramid. For the vast majority of the population, the indigenous peoples, the mestizos, and the free and enslaved Africans, independence brought little meaningful change to their daily lives. The promises of equality and justice remained largely unfulfilled. In many cases, the new Creole-led governments were even more aggressive in seizing indigenous lands than the Spanish had been. The institution of slavery, though questioned, persisted in nations like Brazil for many more decades, a brutal reminder that freedom was not yet a universal right in the newly liberated Americas. The legacy of this tumultuous aftermath echoed for generations. The new nations struggled with immense foreign debt, often owed to the very European powers from whom they had sought freedom. Economic dependency shifted from Spain and Portugal to Great Britain, and later the United States. Border disputes between the new republics led to frequent conflicts, such as the devastating war between Argentina and Brazil over the territory that would become Uruguay. The initial decades after independence were not a period of glorious nation-building, but a painful and chaotic struggle for survival, a time when the immense challenge of forging cohesive nations from the fragmented remnants of empire became tragically clear. The epic story of the Americas, from the first footsteps across the Bering Land Bridge to the birth of modern nations, is a saga of unparalleled scale and complexity. It is a chronicle of human resilience, innovation, and endless adaptation. The slow, patient work of the first agriculturalists transformed wild plants into the foundation of great civilizations. Pyramids of Teotihuacan, Maya intellectual achievements, Inca road networks, ancient cultures with deep knowledge of land and cosmos, created worlds rich in art, science, and philosophy. The arrival of Europeans shattered that long development, unleashing conquest, disease, and exploitation. Two worlds met and forged a new society in the crucible of conflict. 3 centuries of colonial rule produced deep contradictions, immense wealth, immense suffering, and new hybrid cultures born even under the weight of oppression. The spirit of resistance was never extinguished. It smoldered in quiet acts of defiance, erupted in fiery revolts, and ultimately culminating in the great wars of independence that redrew the map of the hemisphere. The legacy of this immense journey is all around us today. The modern nations of the Americas are a vibrant and at times discordant tapestry woven from multiple threads of history. The languages, the religions, the food, and the very blood of the people reflect this complex heritage. Indigenous origins, European origins, and African origins. The political borders are a testament to the ambitions of liberators and the rivalries of caudillos. Deep social inequalities persist in many nations, long shadows cast by the colonial caste system and the exploitation of labor. The struggle for justice, for land, and for cultural recognition by indigenous communities is a direct continuation of a resistance that began 500 years ago. The story of the Americas is therefore not a closed chapter of history, it is an unfinished journey. The quest to build more just societies, equitable societies, and stable societies, to reconcile the legacies of conquest with the promise of freedom, continues every day. From the ancient migrations that populated a hemisphere to the modern migrations that continue to reshape it, the defining characteristic of the Americas has always been change and transformation. Understanding this deep past, dramatic past, and often difficult past is the essential first step to navigating the present and shaping the future of this incredible continent of wonders, a story that is still being written by its people.